Welcome back, everybody, to another week of Sunday School here at the Lighthouse Church of the Nazarene in Moravia, Iowa, where we are going through the book of Esther. This week, we're in Esther chapter 6. So, what's been going on in the book of Esther up until now? Well, the evil King Haman, who is second in command under King Ahasuerus, has made a decree that all the Jews will be executed on a certain date 12 months from now. Esther, who is the queen to King Ahasuerus, is a Jew. So her cousin Mordecai comes to her and says, hey, you need to do something about this. You need to make a petition to the king to try to save all your people. If you don't do it, deliverance will arise from somewhere else, but you and your family will be lost. And then Mordecai says that famous line in the book of Esther to Esther says, for who knows if you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So Esther has decided that she will make a petition to the king. So last week in Esther chapter 5, what did we see? We saw Esther having the people pray and fast for her for 3 days before she goes to the king. And then she gets to the ear of the king, and the king says, Esther, what do you want? Up to half the kingdom. It's yours. And what does she say? She goes, I'm going to have another banquet tomorrow night, and then I'll let you know what we're going to do. So that's what happened last week in Esther chapter 5. Also last week, we saw Haman mad at Mordecai because what will Mordecai not do? Will not bow down, won't tremble in fear before Haman. So Haman says, guess what? I can't wait 12 months to get Mordecai executed. I'm going to erect 75-foot tall gallows and ask the king if I can just kill Mordecai right now because I can't wait the 12 months. I want that man dead right now. So that's where we left off in Esther chapter 5. This week we're going to start Esther chapter 6. So let's get out our Bibles and let's follow along. Esther chapter 6, verse 1. That night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. So the king couldn't sleep. The king surely had a lot on his mind. He had a kingdom to rule. He probably had tons of people coming to him, making petitions. He had to worry about the kingdom. Also, his queen, Esther, he's worrying about what she wants. Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 5:12, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. What Solomon was saying is the rich man has so much to worry about, he can't even enjoy it. He can't even sleep. But the laboring man, he wears himself out during the day and he sleeps like a baby at night. We see other instances in the Bible where people have trouble sleeping too. Perhaps one of the best ones is when King Darius had Daniel thrown in the lion's den. It says that his sleep went from him. It's interesting that Daniel probably slept better in the lion's den than the king did who wasn't in the lion's den. Another instance, we saw King Saul. King Saul had trouble sleeping. And what did King Saul do? He would actually have young David come and play the harp for him because it said Saul had a troubled spirit. So Saul would have David come play the harp for him. One time Saul actually threw a spear at him and tried to kill David while he was playing the harp from him. So we see a couple of different instances in the Bible where the kings have trouble sleeping. The best way for us to get a good night's sleep is to go to bed with a good conscience. If we know that we lived for the Lord, if we sought the Lord and put him first in our life that day, we won't have anything to worry about. And the stuff that we are worried about, what can we do? We can just give it to God. The Bible tells us a couple places. Philippians 4:6, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and mind through Jesus Christ. Psalm 37:8 says, do not worry. It only causes harm. Jesus even said, what did he say? Give me just a second here. Jesus said, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for today, it's its own trouble. So a lot of times when we have trouble sleeping, it's because we're worried about something. But what does the Bible tell us to do? 1 Peter 5:7. Cast all your cares upon him because he cares for you. That's what we can do. All right, so what else can we get out of this? This insomnia that the king has right now, I'm going to say that this insomnia is actually from God because we're seeing the providence of God work out through this entire story right here. The Bible tells us that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. So if God works all things together for good, he's even working in the king's sleeping pattern right here because we're about to see what happens here. One last thing I want to talk about this, and I know I'm getting a lot out of just one verse where the king was having trouble sleeping, but aren't you glad that our king never sleeps? It's in Psalm 121. I lift my eyes up into the hills, for where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. Behold, he who keeps you will not stumble. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither stumble nor sleep. The creator of the universe, the one who holds us all in the palm of his hands, he's not up there taking a rest, but he is ruling the universe with his feet up, is the way I'd like to say it. He's not worried about anything. What else can we take away from this right here? So, let's get back to the providence of God. Of all the things the king could have done, he was having trouble sleeping. Think of all his options. He has a whole harem of women that he could have called in. He would have had musicians. He probably had court jesters. Of all these things, what does the king want done? He's like, hey, can you read me the board minutes from 5 years ago? I think those will put me to sleep. Also, notice that somebody had to actually come and read these chronicles to him. These poor servants. If the king's not sleeping, guess what? Nobody else is going to get to sleep either. So, verse 2, and it was found written that Mordecai had told off Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, and the doorkeepers who sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, what honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And the king's servants who attended him said, nothing's been done for him. This is interesting right here. Just think about the providence of God. That instance of Mordecai saving the king's life happened 5 years ago. It's been 5 years since that event took place. So these servants come and read to him the chronicles, the news of the whole Persian Empire. Of all the books they could have drawn out, they drew out the one that had the minutes, the writings of Mordecai saving his life. They could have grabbed any book, but by the providence of God, they chose that particular book. It's interesting. Did you know that God also has a book of remembrance? It's in Malachi 3:16. I have to turn there real quick. Malachi 3:16. Malachi, last book of the Old Testament. Just as King Ahasuerus has a book of remembrance, listen to this. Malachi 3:16. Then those who feared the Lord spoke to one another, and the Lord listened and heard them. So a book of remembrance was written before him for those who feared the Lord and who meditate on his name. There was a book of remembrance for those who fear God and put him first, and those who fear him and meditate on his name. A lot of times we can say, boy, I'm working for the Lord here. Am I going to get any good out of it? Hebrews 6:10 says, for God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love which you have shown toward his name. Now, I want to make sure everybody understands this. You cannot work your way to heaven. There's no amount of good things you can do to earn your way of heaven. The book of Jeremiah tells us that our righteousness is like filthy rags before the Lord. Ephesians 2:8-9. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith and not of yourself. It is a gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. There's no amount of work you can do to earn your way of heaven. But Jesus also said, behold, when the Son of Man comes with his angels in his kingdom, then he will give to each his reward according to his works. There is a book of remembrance. All our good works, God is not unjust and he will not forget our labor of love. Just something we all need to remember here. So verse 4. So the king can't. All right, so up until now, what's been going on? The king can't sleep. He has somebody come and read him the news of the kingdom from 5 years ago. It's the news that Mordecai saved his life. He goes, hey, what did we ever do for that guy that saved my life? And they go, oh, we didn't do anything. So verse 4. So the king said, well, who's in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he prepared for him. The irony of this right here. Is this not amusing? Haman is coming in to ask the king if he can kill Mordecai, while the king is sitting there going, who can we get to honor Mordecai? This is really an example where the truth is stranger than fiction. If we didn't know that it was true, it almost reads like one of Aesop's fables, does it not? How the humble will be brought up and the proud will be brought low. Also notice how it's early in the morning right here. The Bible tells us, it's in the book of Micah again. Woe to those who devise iniquity and work out evil in their beds, and at morning light they practice it. Haman has probably been up all night also, wondering how he can kill Mordecai, probably supervising the construction of these huge gallows. So just as King Ahasuerus couldn't sleep, I'm guessing that Haman probably wasn't sleeping either. And this is why he's showing up right first part of the day to see if he can get Mordecai killed right here. Verse 5. Then the king's servant said to him, Haman is there standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So he says, hey, who's out there right now? And his servants say, oh, Haman's out there. He's like, oh, good. Haman's second in command. He can take care of this right now. Verse 6. So Haman came in, and the king asked him, what shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? Haman's pride is going to get the better of him right here. The king asked Haman, hey, what should I do for somebody that I really want to honor? What does Haman think? He thinks, well, obviously I'm God's gift to everybody. If he's going to honor anybody, it's got to be me, right? Jesus actually warns us of this situation right here. And it's in Luke 14. Let me turn there real quick. It's in Luke chapter 14. And it's the parable of the ambitious guest. The book of Luke has a lot of good parables that aren't in any of the other gospels. We have the parable of the rich fool in Luke chapter 12. We have the story of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16. We have the parable of the unjust servant. And right here in Luke chapter 14, we have the parable of the ambitious guest, Luke 14:7. So he told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them, when you are invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. And he who invited you and him come and say to you, give place to this man, and then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself would be exhausted. So Jesus tells us, when you go to a wedding, don't sit down in the seat of honor. Go to the lowly place, and then you might get called up. But if you take the high place and somebody says, hey, that's not your seat, you're going to have to get back. Wouldn't that be an embarrassing situation? One of the truly great characteristics of any Christian is humility. That's where it all starts, right there. Pride is the greatest of all sin, pretty much. So we should do our work to the Lord and let God do the exalting. Psalm 75, 6-7. For exaltation comes neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. But God is the judge. He puts down one and exalts another. We would be wise to remember those words right there. So Haman's sitting here thinking, who would anybody want to exalt more than me? The king probably wants to raise me up right now. Let's see what happens. Verse 7. And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, remember, all this time Haman thinks he's talking about himself, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. This whole time Haman thinks he's talking about himself and what's going to be done for him. I'm actually thinking that Haman, it really appears that he aspired to be king one day. Because what does he want? He wants a horse that the king's rode. He wants the royal robes put on him and him paraded around the place. It wouldn't surprise me if Haman, if he had been allowed to live, if he wasn't planning on assassinating the king so that he could be king one day. I really think Haman had aspirations to be king. And this is why he said all these things right here. So verse 10, then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits with the king's gates. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken. Don't you wish you could see Haman's face right now? Hopefully when we get to heaven, we get to see a picture of Haman when he got this news delivered to him. It just had to be great. Also notice right here that the king actually refers to Mordecai as a Jew. You wonder if he's completely forgotten that he's declared this royal edict that all the Jews are going to be assassinated. Or did Haman somehow sneak this in somehow so that the king didn't know what he was actually signing in this edict? It's kind of like when your kids bring home all their permission slips and homework assignments, said, oh, here, sign all these. And you're like, what am I even signing? Oh, don't worry about it. You really wonder if Haman did it, maybe sneaks that through. Because the king, right now, it seems like he doesn't even really remember that he signed this edict right here. So verse 11. So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city square and proclaimed before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So Haman did just as the king commanded him, paraded Mordecai around town on the royal horse, wearing a royal robe, proclaiming that everybody should honor him. Verse 12. Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. Notice here, what did Mordecai do after this great jubilee and exaltation from everybody? He just went back to the gate and continued to serve. Awards and accolades don't change truly humble people, do they not? Mordecai was a humble man, gets paraded around. What does he do? Just goes right back to doing what he was doing before. God knows who he can trust and who he can trust his blessings with. And he can trust his blessings with truly humble people is what we can take away from this right here. Verse 13. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, If Mordecai, before whom you begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. Notice the difference. Last chapter, in chapter 5, Haman had a meeting with all his family, his wife, his children, all his friends, just to talk about how great he was and how exalted he was. And moreover, there was going to be a banquet where only him and the king were invited to it. And now what does he do? Has all the people there, and he just talks about the shame of what he had to do, parading Mordecai around town. But then Haman's wife says something very interesting right here. If Mordecai, before whom you begin to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. Haman's wife almost sounds like Pilate's wife when they were executing Jesus and crucifying him. Pilate's wife said to him, Have nothing to do with this just man, for I have suffered many things in a dream today because of him. Haman's wife also knows that the Jews are a blessed people, that they're God's chosen people. Clear back in Genesis, God said, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. Paul addresses it in Romans chapter 11. Has God cast away the Jews? Certainly not. It's Romans 11:26. All of Israel will be saved. I know the book of Galatians also says there is neither Jew nor Greek nor slave nor free nor male nor female, for we are all one in Christ. But the Jews are God's chosen people, and that's emphasized all throughout the Bible. And Haman's wife seems to know that right there. Verse 14, while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So while Haman is sitting here sulking, crying to his family, what happens? Oh, he's got another banquet to go to. Come on, Haman, let's hustle along and get to your next banquet. It gets even better next week in chapter 7. Go ahead, read ahead, study ahead. We're done for this week. Haman's going to the banquet. He's in the last hours of his life right now. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Bye.